I'm Michael Levine-Clark. I'm the Dean of Libraries at the University of Denver, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves as they come up. So we're here to talk about some of the tools that are needed, well, one specific tool, but really the concept of why you need a tool and what a tool can do when you're thinking about the collective collection, when you're thinking about shared collection development for print, really, at a network level. So what do we mean by the collective collection? This is a term that's coming up more and more. We've certainly been talking about the idea of a collective collection since probably before any of us began our careers. It's sort of always been the idea that if we distribute the purchasing of print, we can build and preserve more. But it's becoming more of a reality as most of us are faced with these large print collections and a transformation to digital, where we are not necessarily using those collections at the level we used to, and our campuses are frequently trying to reclaim that space, and we're forced to think about downsizing the collection, right? So as we think about that, it's really important to think about our collections in relationship to one another. We don't want to inadvertently discard a last copy. We don't want to do something at the local level that negatively impacts the network level. And so as we think about it, right, so how do we coordinate local decisions with regional decisions? So University of Denver with the Colorado Alliance of Research Libraries, and then nationally and even internationally. And how do we balance local needs with the need for preservation? So locally, we maybe need access, but globally, we're trying to preserve collections. And then fundamentally, how do we do all of this in a way that that makes us have good decisions? How do we get the information? How do we do the analysis? How do we gather the data and use the data? How do we think really strategically and carefully about our decisions locally and how those might impact the collective collection? There have been a proliferation of shared print initiatives in the last decade. I put a few of them on this slide, but there are more. Many of them are journal focused, but there are now some that are book focused, and these are initiatives that are generally regional, where we are trying to ensure that we think carefully about what we preserve. I'm on the executive committee for WEST, the Western Regional Storage Trust, and so I'll talk about that one. But they're all doing similar sorts of things. And WEST is a agreement of institutions across the western part of the U.S. to try to preserve journal runs across institutions. So it's a distributed network of institutions that are working together to preserve journal content. Rosemont is a consortium of these of multiple initiatives to preserve print, and is trying to sort of coordinate these regional programs at a national level. The thing that's difficult, though, is that as you start to build these programs, how do you make informed decisions, right? You need a way to compare collections. You need a way to understand what these local collections look like within the context of the regional or the national scene. So there are some tools out there, and the tools that have been developed so far tend to be about analysis, right? So the ability to compare. In some cases, it's about the communication of commitments for retention. So once I've committed to retain a journal run or a book or some other item, I need to be able to communicate that in a way that allows somebody at another institution to make a decision based on my commitment. And then the tools also often are about the communication of needs and offers. So I have something that I'm thinking of discarding, but I want to share it with the group, or I've already committed to retain this journal, but I'm missing 2 volumes, and can somebody get that to me so I can fill that run? I've mentioned a few of these here. So AGWA is the tool that's used by WEST, the Western Regional Storage Trust, for journal analysis and comparison across the WEST members. The Journal Retention and Needs Listing is managed by the University of Florida for FLAIR and for ACERL. And it's a tool for communicating needs and offers and commitments about journals as well. Paper, the Print Archives and Preservation Registry, is a CRL tool. It's also serials focused. And then Green Glass is the OCLC tool from Sustainable Collections. And it's a comparison tool. It's a really robust comparison tool that allows you to compare whatever you as an institution have loaded into the system. And so it's in many ways the reason that we developed Gold Rush, which is the tool that we'll be talking about today. Green Glass is a great tool, but it requires you to provide records to, you have to send records, and then you're charged by the number of records you send, and then you're charged if you want to send records again. So within the Colorado Alliance of Research Libraries, we developed the Alliance Shared Print Trust. We spent several years thinking about what this initiative would be. We formalized this commitment within the state of Colorado plus Wyoming in 2015. Our focus initially was on monographs, and it still is, but we've sort of understood from the beginning that we might expand it to include other types of content in the future. From the beginning, we thought about the fact that this doesn't really make sense unless we think about other shared print initiatives. So we want to make sure that what we do in Colorado fits into the national scene. The graphic up here is from an OCLC report on sort of regional collections, and you notice that Denver is on there as a hub, and these sort of mega regions show that within Denver there's a substantial amount of content that is unique, and that we therefore thought it made a lot of sense for us, even at basically at the state level, to think about shared print. As we were thinking about it, we were already members of WEST. Other people were members of other things. We wanted to make sure that we could compare our collections, and that we could also think about it in the context of those other programs that we're in. So we needed to develop a tool. We looked at the Green Glass tool, and it was too expensive for us. So we developed our own. We needed a tool to compare collections across member institutions, and we needed a tool that we could afford, which was not Green Glass at the time. We wanted to begin with monographs, but we wanted the ability, if we decided to expand the program to include other content types, we wanted to be able to compare our collections over time as the program evolved. We didn't want a snapshot at the beginning. We wanted to be able to continue to compare. So we developed the Gold Rush content comparison tool, and we'll be talking about that over the next half hour or so. So far we've done some of the things you would expect for a tool that we developed for shared print. We've compared Alliance holdings, so that Colorado Alliance holdings, so that local institutions could do some weeding. We've been doing a voluntary registry of our retention decisions. So as institutions have thought about their local collections, we've just made commitments. And one example, University of Denver has a substantial special collections cookbook collection. We also, because of that collection in special collections, we have a very substantial circulating cookbook collection, and we're never going to get rid of that. So we made a commitment to every cookbook in our collection. So those sorts of things were really easy to do. But the other thing that we've done is we've realized as we developed the tool that there are a bunch of other sorts of opportunities to use it. So we've been able to use it to look at overlap by publisher as we've been negotiating ebook packages. And it allows us to think about a multiplier and about a discount because we've been able to say this is what we've done historically with these particular publishers. We also were able to use it to easily export XML mark metadata to send to Google for some of us who wanted to participate in Google Books. So what do we need? This is sort of thinking through what we might need as we really think about the tools to support the collective collection. We need tools, and I think it's going to become more and more essential as we think at the network level about our collections. We need tools to help us understand our local decisions within the context of the broader collection. We need to be able to support both retrospective and prospective collection development, so the legacy print collections, but our decisions going forward as well. We need to be able to support formats of all types in a library. We need to be able to continue to make decisions, right? So tools that allow us to not just make a decision at the beginning, but to continue to make decisions over time. We need tools that recognize that we probably will be participating in multiple shared print programs, and those programs might have different rules in different contexts. We need to be able, this is essential, we need to easily be able to commit retention decisions and commitments across multiple programs so that everybody understands what has been committed to by particular institutions and by particular shared print programs. And it's going to be, I think, essential that these tools integrate with existing tools and with existing standards as we develop them and go forward. So I'm going to turn it over now to George Mackovic, who's going to talk about Gold Rush a little more specifically.
Thank you, Michael. I'm the executive director of the Colorado Alliance of Research Libraries in Denver. We have about 16 member libraries and one public library in the group, Denver Public, one out-of-state library, University of Wyoming, and we are incorporated in 1981. And like many sort of nonprofit consortia, we do a lot of things: licensing, we run a union catalog, the shared print program, and we do software development. And we do have a history of software innovation. We developed something called the Carl Integrated Library System back in the 80s and 90s, which we sold, have no affiliation with. As Michael mentioned, we originally developed the Gold Rush tool for our shared print program. And in our program, people make 25-year commitments for the materials that they tag for retention commitment. But as Michael also mentioned, we wanted a tool that was affordable and scalable. And we also realized that as we began to work on the tool, that it has a lot of additional uses beyond shared print. And because once you get your hands on the data, you can do cool stuff. So what we did is we started with using sort of open source software mostly. So basically it's a solar blacklight implementation, although we do have one piece of charting software that's not open source, so hence the software itself is not open source. But we made it so it's scalable to hundreds of millions of records. We actually host it at University of Denver because they're on I2, they have a lot of bandwidth. We do allow other libraries to use it if they want, basically at cost. So you'll be hearing a little later from Johns Hopkins about how the Ivy Plus group has used it. So one of the big things is, how do you connect records in the system if you don't use OCLC numbers and ISBNs? Why don't we use those? First of all, not all of our libraries had OCLC records. And also, we had over 250,000 records that were old Arlen records that had never been upgraded. So ISBNs didn't exist all the way back. And if we want to work in other formats like microforms or other things, there may not be ISBNs or ISSNs available. So we built a match key based off of elements in the MARC record. And it seems to work pretty good. This is what a match key looks like. You can see on the screen the lower arrow. And it basically, we take this metadata, we create a match key record, we normalize it all, and that's what brings the records together in the system. That's the secret sauce to make it work. What we also do is when the records are loaded in, we retain the original MARC records from every site. So yes, we do create a master indexing record based off of who submitted the best record, but one of the things we wanted to be sure to do is retain each library's local MARC record. Why, you would ask? Because when you export data out, depending on how you do it, you can export your data back out. And so that if somebody wants to do a special project and then export out the MARC records, you can maybe re-ingest them into your local systems, you're getting your stuff back, not some generic MARC record or somebody else's record. So really, the main goal of this initiative was to do analytics within the consortium, but also have the ability to scope to an individual library. So we've had a number of libraries use the system, not for collective analytics, but for institutional analytics. And so you can, by merely one click, you can narrow or scope the system down just to your institution. It really, the way I think of it, it's, we build discovery systems for the patron. This is the discovery system for the librarian. It's the librarian's view into your own data. We also realized we had to make it super easy. It had to be able to meet the needs of experts, but also be such that it wouldn't require massive amounts of training. No, you don't have to be a developer to use it. We also realized when we brought the data in, people want to get their data out. And so we said, okay, well, let's get it out in the original MARC format. We get out MARC XML, Excel, CSV. We've experimented with some BibFrame, RDF triples. We're not doing that right now because of some other issues. But we're open to getting data out of the system in different ways. So here's just one super simple example of, this is sort of a book analysis looking at University of Wyoming compared to the rest of the libraries in the consortia, non-English in the PNN call number ranges. And the chart actually shows what's unique and what's overlapping with other members. And then we have a little chart or a little set table down below that are hot linked to those records that meet those various criteria. If you click on those, you see the records and you can export them or do something with them. We also put into the system a pivot table feature because just a different way to look at data so that you can look at, for example, down one axis and the other axis, you can put libraries, call numbers, dates, subject headings, a whole variety of different elements that we can index that so you can actually drill into things either collectively or individually. We've also, for example, put in, we do something called charting of the facets, so that a lot of times the data you need are built into facets themselves. So, for example, this is just an example of doing a publisher search, but then charting by institution. And of course, you can click on the graph, or you can click on the facet itself to pull out specific data meeting that particular criteria. So beyond the shared print that Michael talked about, some of the other things that we've noticed libraries using it for, both in our consortium and some other groups that have used it, we had one institution who was doing space planning for a remodel and a new addition to their building. And so they wanted to be able to look at things that are out of their primary area of collecting to find overlapping materials so they could get rid of them and see how much space they could save. Duplication in the building of a storage facility, one of the organizations has done. One organization was adding a new program, and they wanted to be able to compare their collection to somebody who already had an established program. Now, they didn't actually even care about the actual numbers in the specific books. They just wanted a chart to show, we've got a little, they've got a lot, give us money. Quick exports for cooperative programs. For example, the Google Analytics that was just talked about. And aggregating metadata for resource sharing is another great use case. I think Gabby will be talking a little bit about backfile purchase from university presses. That it was a specific project we did a year or so ago. and we were able to use the tool to find out which libraries were collecting certain university presses so that we could ask for discounts. Exporting MARC XML to Google was a great project that we're currently doing for a variety of libraries. We've had some cases where libraries want to do analytics on their collection before joining the regional catalog, determining shared print commitments, and really we're looking also at once you've done a shared print program, what have we done? What do we have here? What are we, by date, by subject, by language, by all these different criteria that you want to look at on retention commitments across different libraries. So I will turn it over to Gabby from University of Colorado, who will talk about some use cases at Boulder.
Thanks, George. So George already gave us a couple of great examples about how the tool works, but I thought I would show you a couple of examples from the consortium. So this is the basic landing page for the site comparison, and one of the first steps to using the tool is to select one or more of the libraries to compare. And then as George mentioned, you can also enter search terms. So you could enter a keyword or a subject or a publisher. And this is a great way if you're trying to build a collection in a new area to do a keyword search. It'll search for the titles and the subject headings and really quickly identify those materials. So you can add those things or you can simply leave it blank. And then one of the core features that George mentioned too is the option to compare the holdings of one member library to any or all members of the consortium. So this is a really quick example. I know it's hard to see, but Boulder is the first comparison library on the left-hand side, and then all of the other Alliance members are graphed in the right. And it's just a really quick overview of the titles that are either unique or uncommon. Unique is the light blue and common is the dark blue. And it just gives you a really quick visual comparison of our holdings. And then as George mentioned, sometimes it's helpful to just run a blank search and see the holdings across the consortium. And we realized really quickly that a lot of useful information was in the filters and the facets on the left-hand side. And so they've done a lot of work to make it a lot easier for us to identify the things in those filters by putting the items with the most items at the top of the filter, so they're kind of sorted in descending order. And they've also made it really easy for us to export the data in the filters either to a chart or to Excel for further analysis. And then as George mentioned, they've added pivot reports, which are really useful if you want to do some additional analysis. They work very similarly to pivot tables in Excel, so you can choose different things and put them in rows and columns and create a crosstab of your data, which is really useful. And after you've done that, if you don't like the table, it's really easy to export it to Excel for further analysis. So one of the things that we're looking at is what the collection strengths are currently. And so I created this chart in Excel of the 5 largest academic libraries in the Alliance, just to really quickly see across the LC ranges where are we focusing a lot of our collection attention and to think about where we might want to start building collections. And then other projects in terms of benchmarking and holding, it'll obviously give you a good idea of the size of the collection and help you quickly identify collection strengths. It's also possible to chart and kind of look at the age of the collection or trends over time. One of the things that I created a chart for was the number of books that each Alliance library is purchasing to see who's still buying print and where are we kind of fluctuating in that area. And then we're also really interested in using the tool to do some additional analysis on keywords or subjects to see how diverse our collections are. So what's the coverage in certain LC call number ranges, but also drilling down to that subject level. And then another good example of a project that we're thinking about using the tool for is for our government documents. So CU Boulder is the regional library in the Federal Depository Library Program. And as the regional library, we're responsible for coordinating the needs and offers list. If you're not familiar with this process, all of the participating libraries are responsible for approaching the regional library before they withdraw materials from their own collection. And this is a really manual process of creating lists and spreadsheets and sharing them over email or listservs. I'm going to acknowledge that FDLP Exchange has done a lot to improve the communication and the sharing of the list, but it's still a very manual process to create those lists and share them and do the analysis. So one of the nice things about the content comparison tool is that the Alliance has added pseudo-call numbers as well as a format for government documents. So it makes it really easy for the libraries who are sharing these records to really drill down into the format or a specific pseudo-call number. The other major benefit is that it uses the match points that George mentioned earlier to really programmatically do that comparison really quickly instead of manually looking it up. So again, this would quickly identify things in common or unique materials if we compared Boulder as the regional to any or all of the other libraries. And very similarly, you could drill down into a very specific SUDOC number. It's hard to see, but the chart below will actually give you a list of items that are held at 2, 3, or 4 or more libraries. So we could see where we might have unique pockets of information or where it'd be easy for them to see what the regional is really collecting in. And then just like the data for the regular collection, you can do additional analysis and pivot reports and other tables. So I'm going to pause there because I think those are just 2 really quick examples, and just say that we're also really interested in having other libraries participate. I think we've seen the advantage of having the benchmarking and comparison for the Alliance, and it would be awesome to have other libraries participate so we could compare our collections to other peer institutions. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz, and she's going to talk about a project at the Ivy Plus libraries.
Hi. So I'm here not on behalf of Johns Hopkins, but on behalf of the Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation. And this is about a specific project that we had done using Gold Rush. So Ivy Plus is the ancient 8 Ivies, and then us 5 interlopers to make the plus. So it's Stanford, Chicago, Duke, Hopkins, and MIT as the plus. So not everyone participated in this project. We figured if we could get 6, it's hard to get 13 institutions to agree on everything all the time. So we started with the 6, but the remaining 7 also contributed money for the funding and did have access then to Gold Rush and all of the records of the 6 that we put in there. So our big Ivy Plus strategic priorities are actually developing collaborative collection development management, and it's not something that we've done necessarily as a group before. We have a long history of resource sharing, but not so much of a history of collaborative collection development. So we were really looking for a tool. So the scope of what we were doing in this project was very limited. It's the Gold Rush tool, document our work and time required so we have a good understanding of how we can do collaborative collection development moving forward, analyze the documentation of the resources needed to see if we could scaffold this project up, and then the initial analysis of the data and recommendations for next steps. And I think for us, one of the hardest things to do was really make sure we kept this project in scope. When you start working with librarians and you're talking about pulling data into different things, it's like, well, we could pull this in too, and we could pull this in too. So we got very good at saying, well, is that really in scope? Is that really in scope? So I just would recommend having someone on your team who keeps you in scope. So we took, our data set was a bibliographic data for single part print monographs from 6 institutions for the time frame of 2013 to 2017. And then the task force developed the specific elements from the bibliographic records that they wanted to put in there. We ended up with 1.6 million MARC records, of which 1.1 had unique match keys assigned by Gold Rush. So I think that worked out pretty good. So one of the things we found out is our data is messy. It's really great when it comes together, but we all have MARC records and we all use them somehow a little bit differently. Things go in fields a little bit differently. We had 6 libraries, but 4 different ILS systems, so pulling that stuff together created some really interesting things. So here is our data analyst called this match key issues. I actually think it's really our data issues. So you can see on this title, it's represented differently in, or four different representations of it. Some with interesting spaces. Brown has a completely different year for the same title. So you can see when you start looking at some of this stuff, what you're going to start finding when you bring your records from different institutions together. So our collection analysts, we were lucky that almost all of us had collection analysts at our institutions, and they got together and did some really specific use case analysis on how effective the match key was, and ran some deeper analysis on call number, on a publisher, and then on language, and took this stuff into both R and OpenRefine, and were able to look at this a little bit closer. And then we also were able to take our individual, do some individual analysis on our records. So this is, again, was used in using R. And so when I look at, about 54% of our collection is actually either one, two, or three copies within the corpus of all the other collections. So it's actually more unique than I had expected it to be, especially for records from 2013 to 2017. People talk about how homogeneous all of our collections are, and, well, they're really not. So for us, we really enjoyed working with Gold Rush, and we really enjoyed working with George and how responsive his team was. So we had, when we would run into things that like, well, why isn't this matching? They were so easy to work with, and they got back to us really quickly, and we worked with them on a number of other things that we would like to have the tool do. So using them was just great. We liked him so much that phase 2 of the pilot started last week. We're adding the records of the other 7 institutions in, and I think we just renewed our subscription. So it's a strong endorsement for the tool. There we go. I see you're all stunned. So if you have questions for any of us, I'm sure we'd be happy to take them. Hi, Julia.
I'm also interested in whether you see the potential to see the correlations between print and online. So out of this, it's always about the print collection, but I'm also, based on this situation, are we really buying print or not? But what about the candidacy for online content? Do you see that you'll be using it now?
I don't know if we're going to use it to kind of compare our print and online books. I think a lot of it is because we all buy online ebooks so differently. So we and some of the records we get for the online stuff, I'm not sure how well they're going to match. But I don't know, if George, if
We, the way the match key is currently constructed, print and online will be separated out in the system. So remember, one of the things that we're building into it is that, it's funny, you build a system for particular use cases in mind, and then there's always other use cases that don't quite fit. So if you have, for example, a monograph that's print and online, they're likely going to separate out in the system on purpose but we do have a format facet built into the system. So if you load all of your records in, we have what we call a multi-valued format facet. So you can either include or exclude print, online, or other formats of materials. We did a project with our Denver Public Library where they were looking at music scores. So they were able to use the music score facet to do analytics because they wanted to give away music scores. But once again, the print and online merging and matching isn't quite the way we designed the system at this point. So. Right. The question was, do we incorporate usage data? The answer is we're starting to work on that. Early on, I think because our main goal was shared print, and we didn't include it. But what our plans are is if a library can include usage data, that we would then create a new facet out of that, so you could do greater than or less than kind of limits on number of circulations, and probably also a last circuit date would also be important if that can be provided. So it's not there yet, but that's actually in the future, and it's in our plans.
Hi.
Hi.
How many librarians are here? Can you just, okay. I'm asking because this is a public good question as well. So if you're not on this, then get into it, okay? Because it's affordable. So I'm in Lehigh now. This is one of the first things I did was join. And I think this is really important because if we're building collections around, analytics of any kind, this is a good point for it. So, and use cases probably are going to show up, with time. So, I think good stuff. Acquisitions and all of that, Michael talked about prospective and retrospective. So, can you kind of try and address prospective and plans for that? I know we've been talking about several things. Liz is already looking at me in that way, but still, let's talk about it because it was kind of in the mission statement at the beginning of this talk.
Yeah. This next phase that we're working on is going to be more towards prospective collection development. Once we start looking at the collection, the data from the collection and how it's sorting out, that's our next step. So we're having actually two groups. We're kind of having a group that's doing the perspective and then the retrospective. And I put the slide in there on scope creep just for you, Boaz.
So we gave one example of some of what we've been doing in terms of prospective collection development, in terms of using the tool to compare, to understand what we've been doing in terms of university press purchasing, so that we could negotiate a shared agreement across the Alliance for University Presses, University Press ebooks. And that's the sort of thing I think that we want to do more of. One of the things that I would hope we can do over time is by continuing to add records and to understand what we're doing collectively, we can adjust our approval plans, we can adjust, make decisions that benefit both the local library and the group. My hope is that we would be able to collectively buy fewer copies of more titles by understanding where that overlap is and where the uniqueness is, and sort of balancing that and then expanding what we're able to offer collectively. And thank you, Boaz, for the plug and the push to add content to share your records. This is a tool that allows you as a local institution to understand how you fit into sort of whatever grouping you want to compare with. It also allows you to do a one-to-one comparison if you wanted to compare with a particular institution. And I think back years ago, maybe a decade ago, we were using the WorldCat collection development tool, comparison tool, to do some comparison of our dance collections, because we have a special collection in dance, right? And we wanted to compare with other institutions that were strong in that area. And to do that, we had to, I think we had to ask for permission for those institutions to share their data. We had to pay for the WorldCat tool. It was not an easy process. We got some good data out of it. But with this tool, once the data is in there, anybody can use it for any purpose that they can imagine at their institution for understanding their local collection within the context of that other set of institutions. So we would love to have more libraries participate.
So just, I think on echoing the affordability aspect of it. So for the records that we put in for our project last year, I think we paid like $4,500, split across 13 libraries. So that was so super affordable, super affordable.
Yeah, I'm Dave Tickerson from Cal State Fresno. Our system used green glass a number of years ago where we bought it centrally for everybody and actually didn't get all that much use, so we didn't continue it. But with green glass, when we had it, it was a snapshot in time. Is your product a snapshot or is it a dynamic product?
It's halfway in between. You can, most libraries do update their data, and we encourage you to update it monthly or quarterly. And if you can automate or script that process out of your ILS, like with Alma or Sierra, something like that, it's very easy to do. And then every month, we just push in new data. Either they can be updates or a complete replacement of your data set, which would also take into account things that you've weeded. So it can be updated, but the most would be about once a month. So, but it's not real-time updating.
Oh, but that's better than once.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, once ever. Also, since that time, the CSUs have all gone to a central Alma catalog. Could we load just out of the central catalog and include all the holdings of all the campuses?
You can. Typically what we do is we set up an FTP bucket where you would drop in the records from each site because the FTP bucket defines the institution in the system. So typically we do have one shared Alma site in our own consortium, CSU Fort Collins, CSU Pueblo, and they break up their exports into the two institutions and drop into the buckets. So the answer is yes, you can do it from Alma.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, I think we're at the end. So thank you very much, and please be in touch if you're with George if you're interested in pursuing Gold Rush further.